Hey, listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and this time we're going to be talking about the possibility of there being multiplayer added to the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Could this really be likely? With the things I've seen throughout Tears of the Kingdom, I'm thinking maybe. And if so, how exactly would it work? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we go further, let me point out that we are aiming to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. With your help, it just might be possible. So you first might be asking, why in the world would they add multiplayer to Tears of the Kingdom? They've never done multiplayer in a Zelda game before. Well, that's not entirely true. There have been a few Zelda games that have had some element of multiplayer. Triforce Heroes comes to mind, for example. But when it comes to the more traditional single-player adventure Zelda games, then sure, yeah, there hasn't been any multiplayer added to these games. But in the case of Tears of the Kingdom, I do think it's a peculiar situation. Playing through the game, there were a number of scenarios that made me consider the possibility. And I'll be getting to those, but I will point out that there will be some gameplay spoilers in this video, if that's not obvious. But I will not be speaking about the story in any way, shape, or form, so don't worry about that. But you might see some things they may not have unlocked yet in terms of gameplay, so do keep that in mind. But before I even get to some of these gameplay elements, I think I should first talk about the possibility of there even being DLC added to Tears of the Kingdom. Because Tears of the Kingdom is a $70 game. And for many, they feel that's already a tall ask. It's an expensive game, especially compared to other Nintendo Switch games. And while Tears of the Kingdom is a very large game, and I think it does warrant the price considering how much content it has and how long it's been in development, it's kind of staggering. To expect us to pay even more than $70, well, that might not be reasonable with the base game. I think it's totally okay to create a large game, spend years on it, but then afterwards consider other possibilities to add more content for players to enjoy who want it, and you charge a little bit more for it after the fact. I think that's totally fair. Now, sometimes there's debate about whether the content was made before or after the game came out, and that's tough to say because we won't know for sure, but in the case of Tears of the Kingdom, it's very clear that this game was in development for a very long time and has tons of things to do, so if there's any game that can get away with having DLC added without us even really questioning when it was put in and when it was separated, it's Tears of the Kingdom. And the game's now been out for over a month and there still has been no mention of DLC. But that doesn't mean there won't be DLC. If you look at every single Nintendo game that's come out for the Switch that isn't a remaster or a port, I'm hard-pressed to think of any that don't have any DLC. Maybe 1-2 Switch that came out back in 2017. There might be some third-party collaborations. I'm trying to remember if there's any DLC added to Astral Chain. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But most Nintendo games have DLC. We're talking about 90+%. So with that in mind, there is a likelihood that DLC will be added. Now, it might not be paid DLC. For example, Super Mario Odyssey, one of the few ground-up new Nintendo games that doesn't have paid DLC, they still added free DLC. And this free DLC added actually a bit of a multiplayer component. You could compete with others' high scores around the world. Now, Mario Odyssey technically had a little bit of co-op already in the game, but the point I'm making here is that there is some precedent for there to be DLC added to a single-player focused game that has some multiplayer elements. And when I think about Tears of the Kingdom, there's a number of ways they could add some sort of multiplayer element that would be beneficial. Something really simple. What if they were to add some sort of code system so we could trade different auto builds that we've come up with? That would encourage a lot more experimentation and people continually playing Tears of the Kingdom, staying interested in the game, trying out different devices and contraptions. And Nintendo's going to want to keep Tears of the Kingdom relevant for a long time. It may be a very long time before we see the next big Zelda game, so they likely want Tears of the Kingdom to stay relevant for as long as possible, maybe for the next 4, 5, 6 years, if not even longer. So I do feel they will take steps to keep the momentum going for Tears of the Kingdom, especially towards this holiday. They're going to want to give it another big push, so having some level of DLC added around that time, I do think makes sense. But going beyond this, are there any signs within the game itself that suggest there could be some DLC being added? I think so. But before I go further, let me briefly mention today's sponsor, Instant Gaming. We've recently partnered with them, and they're a pretty exciting site if you are interested in buying games at a discount that are digital. You can go to their site and you can get digital games for PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and yes, even Nintendo Switch. And you can get some discounted games digitally, including eShop cards. You can save a few dollars on eShop cards, so if there's a particular game that you don't maybe see a discount on Instant Gaming, you could buy an eShop card and get points so you can spend those on the eShop and save a little bit of money. So if you want to go ahead and check that out, it is linked in the description below, and if you do make any purchases on Instant Gaming, it will help out the channel. So I appreciate it, but now back to the video. While playing through Tears of the Kingdom, there were a few moments that really had me scratching my head. For example, there are shrines that when you go into them, you will notice there are several builds of the same device when there's no need for them to be there. You might see 3 cars or 3 planes and you're wondering, but you only need one. And usually when, let's say you like drop a device or destroy it somehow, the game will just duplicate it when you need it. That's how it works for most shrines, so why do they leave several devices of the same kind in some of these shrines? Maybe it's just facilitating some crazy build ideas. Maybe you can just merge them together and create some sort of megaton driving or flying device. But considering some of the narrow spaces these shrines have, I'm not sure that was necessarily the main intent. It could be that, and maybe they were just there in case you do drop something, that way you don't have to build it back up again. That's also a possibility. But it does make me wonder if maybe they had some ideas of multiplayer. Maybe that's why they have multiple cars you can use or multiple flying vehicles in these contained spaces that are the shrines. But then I also thought about how when you progress through the game, you unlock different abilities that literally have other characters traveling the world by your side, and this can stack up to 5. So it can be you and 5 other characters running by your side, fighting and doing different things with the world, interacting with the world. And I would have never thought they would have had these many characters that can travel alongside you throughout this entire open world experience that have so many different things going on. And what makes it crazier is that you can fight the monster forces that have dozens of enemies alongside all of your companions as well at the same time, with tons of effects going on, and the game still runs relatively fine. I'm not going to say that there are never any frame hiccups, but there are frame drops at random points all throughout the game. It doesn't seem to be significantly worse during these moments. The game was designed with this in mind, to have these many characters on screen at a time interacting with each other. What makes things even crazier is that there is the side adventure where you can fight alongside the forces of Hyrule to defend the land against these monster forces with all of your companions all at the same time, while also having crazy builds causing all levels of destruction. Well, maybe not all levels because the world isn't fully destructible, but the point is there is a lot going on here, and I would have never expected anything like this before I actually saw it with my own eyes. So if the game can handle this many characters on screen, and there are certain shrines that have multiple builds that almost seem to suggest that they were at least considering multiplayer, potentially, and with there likely going to be some level of DLC to keep the momentum for Tears of the Kingdom going at least to the holiday, and I also think well beyond, I think there's a chance they could do some level of multiplayer DLC. Just think about this for a moment. What if you could play with yourself and 3 other friends, so 4 players together, in the same open world that is Tears of the Kingdom, being able to travel alongside some of your companions from the game. Maybe you can't summon all of them at the same time, but maybe 1 or 2 just to limit things so you can play with your friends at the same time and still go fight a horde of enemies that are the monster forces in Hyrule. That could lead to some crazy things. Maybe you could have some level of player versus player where you're fighting each other or competing against each other with your different builds, or even racing around. Considering the giant playground that Tears of the Kingdom is and all the things you can do with the different abilities and the building, think about how much crazier it could be if you could do that with your friends. And it would drastically increase the replay value of Tears of the Kingdom. And as I brought up earlier, I think maybe there would have to be some limitations. I have a hard time believing you could use all of your companion characters while playing with 4 different friends. maybe you can only have one at a time, but to have one at a time while playing with your friends, I think that would be insane. Personally, I don't even like playing with all the companion characters at a time because I think it can get kind of hectic. But if I can just have one that is most beneficial to me in the moment, and then all my friends are doing something else on their own with their own screen, but we're sharing this world, that could lead to some insane, exciting gameplay possibilities. And just to be clear, when I'm saying multiplayer, I mean online multiplayer. I don't think there's any way you can pull this off on one single system. And while multiplayer in an open world may seem kinda drastic, let's point out that even Game Freak was able to produce Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and while that was a buggy mess, you could play 4 players in the same open world all throughout. So considering everything else that you can do in Tears of the Kingdom, I am not sure it's a total stretch. And even if you can't do multiplayer in the open world, maybe they could add a Trial of the Sword mode, kind of like how they added DLC for Breath of the Wild, where there's a series of challenges in these more contained areas, kind of like a whole bunch of remixed shrine environments. And maybe in these environments we could have that multiplayer. Even that could be really cool to see, just to have the opportunity to go against players and use your different builds against each other or race each other. That would be really fun and exciting, and if Nintendo can come up with some challenges for multiplayer Tears of the Kingdom, that would make it even more exciting. But at the end of the day, this is just speculation, this is just a consideration of something that might be fun. I think there are some aspects of Tears of the Kingdom that suggest it could be possible, but it is just a possibility. If more evidence presents itself, or if there's anything else that you've noticed about Tears of the Kingdom that might suggest this, let me know in the comments below, or if there's some other crazy DLC idea that you would like to see, let me know. But that's all for now, everyone. This is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.